Welcome to Block and Order, the show that explores the legal issues facing the world of Web3 and beyond. I am a properly attired Kyle Lawrence, and with me all the way at the crack of dawn from the left coast, Mr. Moish Peltz.
Morning, Kyle, from sunny San Diego.
San Diego.
San Diego.
San Diego. Yeah, I messed
What
that
brings you
up.
out there, man?
I am at the International Trademark Attorney Conference, the annual meeting in San Diego, where there's about 11,000 registered trademark attorneys all buzzing around
Wow.
the San Diego Conference Center, and probably another 10,000 that haven't registered that are like still there. It's the most insane conference. You can tell my voice is already shot. Um,
Conference
and
life is real, man. Yeah.
It's exciting though, related to Block and Order is, I do a lot of blockchain work at this conference as part of the IP practitioner community,
Mm-hmm.
and actually had a panel on Saturday morning, this a few days ago, for our audience, that was talking about enforcement of Web3 on the blockchain, IP enforcement specifically, and how trademark attorneys around the world can use trademark laws, you know, effectively to prevent people from cracking their brands using blockchain stuff. So uh,
That is cool.
that's yeah,
Well, look at you, jet
well
setting
received.
all over. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
great.
exactly.
Well, thank you for tuning in from the opposite coast. We have a very special episode coming up for our viewers and listeners out there. Matt McClintock, the founder of Bespoke Group. And it was a wonderful conversation that started off with me having a bit of some technical and, if we're being honest, spiritual difficulties at the very beginning. But Matt was just what a gamer. I mean, a rock star. He was a terrific guest. His insights were really incredible, not just from a technical perspective of how people go about preserving their wealth and protecting their assets, whether it's Bitcoin or traditional assets, but just the philosophical approach that he had and his understanding of this ecosystem at its roots was something that I felt really impressive and important to me.
Yeah, almost a philosophical Zen-like approach to this issue, and I thought his depth of understanding of the nuances of crypto and the issues that face holders, large and small, was really unmatched. So blown away by the conversation. I'm sure the audience is going to love it.
And without further ado, here's our conversation with Matt McClintock.
Joining us today on Block and Order is Matt McClintock. Matt, it is a pleasure to have you on board here today with us, and would love to just ask you, a bit about, who you are, your background, and how you got into your current role.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. It's great to be on your program, guys. Thanks a lot for hosting me. Yeah, Matt McClintock. I'm an attorney by background. Spent 25 years in the trenches doing sophisticated estate planning for ultra affluent families, primarily based in the United States. I'm just up in the mountains, a little bit west of Denver. It's kind of tough duty, but somebody's got to do it. And my in 2017, I was just minding my own business with my law practice, doing estate planning work the way we do it, multi-jurisdictional, alphabet soup of sophisticated planning. And along comes a young family with about $150 million worth of Bitcoin. And I didn't
That's
know
in 2017.
I was in 2017.
Wow. Yeah.
That's back when
today.
That's back when $150 million was a lot of money. But they're doing okay. Kids are going to make it. But I didn't know anything about Bitcoin. My business partner, my law partner, didn't either. And so we said, well, he wanted to demur on this thing, and I said, this is kind of an interesting thing. Let's at least have the conversation figured out. So I met with this family up in Boulder, just north of me, and I was just fascinated by the story, just how they got into Bitcoin around 2017. They were serial entrepreneurs in the space and the ideology around it and the hard money qualities. And I was just kind of psychologically hooked, right? My interest was peaked, like right on. But then as Jonathan, my business partner, and I were driving back, he said, yeah, we can't touch this thing. It's like, we don't understand it. I said, dude, I'm going to take the other side of that. It's like, we have to take this because one, this is this family's entire body of wealth. They've got a massive taxable estate. They've got potential creditor concerns because, they're serial entrepreneurs. They're just a business problem waiting for a place to happen. we got to do this. And if we don't do this, somebody else is going to do it anyway. So we might as well be on the leading edge of this. And so, one thing led to the next, and we did a ton of estate planning for those people at the end of 2017, first part of 2018. We kind of reached another Rubicon moment when they said, "Can we pay you guys in Bitcoin?" And the answer had to be yes. We had to figure that out.
Had to be yes.
Had to be yes. And along the way, they said, "Hey, these structures are great. We did some stuff in Wyoming, some stuff in Alaska, some stuff in Nevis, some stuff in the Cook Islands, whatever, for all the reasons that we can maybe get into if you want to." But along the way, they said, "This is great, but can you guys help us manage this stuff? Can you guys help us manage our real estate?" And by just continuing stumbling forward and saying yes and yes and yes and yes, we accidentally became a fractional virtual family office for this client. This is before I even knew what a family office was. We were doing it. And we created Bespoke because it was tailor-made for what these people wanted. That's, we were just doing it as we went. And then through the cycle of the practice, I did a lot more continuing education presentations. I did a lot of writing around what Bitcoin is, how it works in the estate planning context. Started to learn more about the deeper crypto space and Web3 and L1 protocols, and started just getting more founders and more Bitcoin whales. And almost to a person, they would, once we did their estate planning, they wanted us to do their family office too. And then the family office kind of took on its own life to the point where we restructured 2022, 2023, formed an SEC registered RIA inside of Bespoke Group. So we're now fully licensed, registered, all that kind of stuff. And we got to the point where we couldn't maintain the law practice and the family office at the same time. So closed the law practice down last year, and now just fully leaning into Bespoke Group as a global multifamily office with just this unusual level of interest and expertise in Bitcoin and the broader crypto space. We didn't seek to become what we've become. It just kind of happened organically. And we crossed the $1 billion mark back in December. So we're about one.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. It felt like a big milestone. And then we're right around 1.4, 1.5 billion. And of that,
I always hear the first billion's the hardest.
That's what I hear. That's what I hear.
Second one's easy. Takes 6 months.
Right, especially with Bitcoin. Or then it could be down to 500 million. So it's like there's that too. But no, it's of the 1.4-ish billion we support, probably 700 million is still Bitcoin. And then helping clients diversify in intelligent ways through charitable planning and structured strategies and stuff like that. Coast to coast, I've got 2 partners in Europe. My head of asset management is based in Lisbon. Our chief investment officer is based in Paris. I got clients from Isle of Man or kind of places in the UK all the way to California. Don't have anything in Asia yet, but we've got staff that span as far east as Zurich to as far west as San Diego, and lots of points in between.
You said something really interesting there, which was you were an estate planning attorney for decades, and then you got this case, and you're like, you and your partner were like, maybe not. And we deal with a lot of other attorneys, and attorneys are known for being a little crotchety and conservative, and not always taking on the newest kind of greatest. So what about your background or your work as an attorney do you think primed you to say, hey, like let's exercise some curiosity here and dive a little deeper and take on this thing that might be, $150 million estate planning project, like that could go wrong and you could have issues that come up with that. So what do you think led you to accepting the kind of risk and reward that comes with something like that?
To be quite honest, it's probably because I'm not a very good attorney. I mean, it's like, I'm a good strategist. I'm an asymmetric thinker. I have a knack for connecting seemingly disconnected things in novel ways. And Jonathan, my co-founding business partner, he's an excellent attorney, and he's very linear thinking and very process oriented. And I've always been kind of the guy in the in the Wild West and the at the tip of the spear, into the horizon type of thing. And I think it's because, my upbringing is unusual. I think for a lot of lawyers, I don't come from a family of attorneys. I'm the first guy on my dad's side of the family to have even gone to college, let alone get an advanced degree. So I kind of was raised as a scrappy guy. That's just my background. Originally from Oklahoma. we kind of make stuff happen. And now I live here in Colorado in the Wild West, and it's just kind of the way I see the world. And I've been fortunate, just during the course of my career. I've just been exposed to a lot of different ideas. I read deeply. I read a lot of philosophical books, like a lot of philosophies. I read a lot of histories. I mean, I just try to read a lot of stuff and just consume a ton of information. And then I try to give myself space to just make connections. And for me, it's like, I probably because I just kind of YOLO into stuff. It's like, I don't, it's like, risks be damned. We're just going to figure this out, and we'll plan, we'll mitigate, but we're going to charge forward because somebody's going to have to do this, and it might as well be us.
Were there other technologies while you were an estate planning attorney, or other like business ventures or things like that that came along that made you have similar thoughts? Or was it really like you saw Bitcoin and like, let's do this?
Yeah, it's funny because during the course of a prior job I was in, before I opened the law practice that we since wound down, I was vice president of education for a national company that did continuing legal education and document assembly software for estate planning attorneys. And so to a certain degree, I got to be like the guy up on the mountaintop, just kind of navel gazing and thinking about what's interesting and all this kind of stuff. And so it got me to where I didn't really have to worry about case matters and caseload and where the next client's coming from. I had a paycheck, I had all this kind of stuff. And so I could just really think big. And so I got paid for 10 years just to think. And along that line, I got really interested in the role of trust protectors and how to structure first directed trusts in different ways, using trust advisors or trust directors or trust protectors, and how you can be really granular in how you give the powers, and whether those powers are fiduciary or not fiduciary, and whether fiduciary is binary or on the spectrum, and then starting to apply that beyond the trust space into the limited liability company space. And what Bespoke really started as was a failed project. Bespoke started as a company that was going to be a dedicated institutional trust protector company. I had created this model. I'd written some articles. I'd done some presentations called the Bespoke Trust Protector, because my theory was, and the law is very clear, that you can tailor make the role of the trust protector. You can tailor the powers. You can even tailor the fiduciary exposure based on what you want, but you have to understand what you want first. And so I had done a lot of thought leadership around this. And when I left that other business, I was going to do two things. I was going to start the law practice, which was evergreen legacy planning. And I also had started a Bespoke Protector company, thinking that would be trust protectors. And for the first, 8 months, 10 months of that Bespoke Protector lived kind of in parallel to the law practice, I said, I don't really see a path to revenue on this deal. It's like, nobody wants to pay me to do this stuff. It's like, they're interested in it.
It's a great idea. Everyone loves it, but
everybody loves it, but nobody's going to pay for it. So it's like, well, that's not that great. And so as I was mapping out the estate planning strategies for this very first Bitcoiner, in the middle of the schematic, I'm a very visual guy. And so I was creating a schematic on this big glass wall behind me. And there was a hole in the middle of the schematic there, which was who or what is going to serve as the manager of the limited liability company that's going to own this luxury real estate. Because from a privacy perspective and from an asset protection perspective, we had the real estate owned by a limited liability company. It was a manager managed limited liability company, not member managed. And the members were two Wyoming incomplete non-grantor trusts. Because at the time, Colorado's income tax was high enough to justify a little bit of juice out of a non-grantor trust. And so client settlor settles the two non-grantor trusts. The two non-grantor trusts form the limited liability company, but somebody's got to manage the LLC. Somebody's got to go to closings. Somebody's name is going to appear in the chain of title as the manager of this LLC. And the client said, well, it ain't me, because I want this for privacy. This person's well known. And so I said, this is the hole in the schematic. I said, well, I was talking to Jonathan, my partner, and I said, what if we put Bespoke in the middle of that hole? And he said, yeah. He said, we'll pitch it and see what happens. And so I said, look, I told the client, I said, look, we've got this other company. It's not doing anything. We could slot our Bespoke company in there as the non-member manager of your limited liability company, I as the manager of the of Bespoke, serving in its capacity as the manager of your LLC. We'll go to closings. We'll sign the documents. Fiduciary standard under the LLC Act, governed by the operating agreement. Great. Client said, great. What's it going to cost me? And I said, I don't know. I said, then I started doing some research about this kind of stuff and said, well, what probably makes sense is a percentage of the value of the property inside this thing. And so we figured out some kind of sliding scale of basis points. I didn't know what basis points were. I was so naive. And so it's like, so I pitched it. The client said, yeah, let's do it. Cool. By the way, can I pay my invoices in Bitcoin? Okay.
Just gets better and better.
Just gets better and better. So before long, we're stacking sats before I even knew what stacking sats meant. And so that's really the evolution of how Bespoke started. I mean, you guys have just heard the origin story.
That's really interesting. You must have been sweating the Corporate Transparency Act that was putting a nail in the coffin of privacy protections for everybody out there. Yes and no, because we found a wrinkle in the Corporate Transparency Act. Again, we can go on this. Look, I don't have a hard stop, so I can just go all day. So yes and no. I wasn't sweating it because we could always comply. No big deal. It's fine. I mean, I was very early to be pissed off about the CTA. I mean, I thought it is a profound invasion of privacy. I'm with you. I think it's a profound violation of the rights of due process. I think the Supreme Court got it wrong. There are 9 guys, there are 9 people in Washington who disagree with me, but I mean, the way it was enacted, the way it was piggybacked onto the Defense Authorization Act. I mean, the thing died in committee until it got tacked on to must pass legislation, because who's going to be the member of Congress who's going to go back on an election year and say, yeah, I voted against the Defense Authorization Act because of some type of esoteric little thing called the Corporate Transparency Act? Nobody cares. And then it got, back and forth, as we all know. And then Supreme Court finally signed off on it. Yep, it passes constitutional muster. Again, I think they're wrong about that, but I'm not the one in the robe. And then we see now a new constitutional crisis arises when you have the executive branch refusing to enforce law enacted by Congress that's been reinforced by, I believe it was a unanimous decision at the Supreme Court. It's like, I kind of remember Marbury versus Madison during my constitutional law 1L class, but here we are kind of in this hiatus. I think the Corporate Transparency Act sucks. I think it's terrible. I've been unapologetic and unabashed in my resistance to it. I've also done a little bit of presentations on the wrinkle. It's right there. It's in the black letter of the law. And it's also addressed in the comment period, which was, remember there are 2 definitions that are pivotal. One is the domestic reporting company and one is the foreign reporting company. Domestic reporting company is pretty much everything that matters in the wealth transfer and wealth structuring space. The foreign one is the wrinkle, because the foreign LLC, the foreign reporting company, has a 2-pronged test. One, it's an entity that is formed under a Secretary of State or comparable regulator in the jurisdiction where the entity was formed. And the critical word is and, not or. And the LLC, the entity, must also register in the United States with a Secretary of State, tribal authority, or something similar. Mm-hmm. So then the opportunity becomes, if you can thread the needle between a company established outside the United States that is exempt from filing with a domestic entity, you have a foreign non-reporting company. That very issue was raised in the comments during the regulatory period, and they didn't change it. They didn't close it. Oh, wow.
So it's like, is it a loophole? It's what the law says. And that's what lawyers say. It's like, that's what the law says. If Congress wants to change the law, change the law. During the rulemaking period, Treasury could have closed it. They didn't. It's in the comments. I've read the entire thing.
the conjunction "and" is the pivotal point.
So well, it's interesting because then the enforcement leaves the door open for foreign reporting companies, but then it sounds like now there's a loophole for some of them. So
well, you can create a foreign non-reporting company that remains exempt even if the executive branch decided that they would enforce the law. This loophole or this gap remains until they change the rules, until they change the regulations. So I think we kind of have two things working in our favor. One is the constitutional crisis of Marbury versus Madison 2, which may or may not ever come. And even if that does come, they will have to change the law, which may give all of us rebels an opportunity to, raise a ruckus again and, maybe get a different outcome.
Right. I think we'd be happy with some, crypto regulation, but we'll start small. We'll go from there up to constitutional crises.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was a bit of a diatribe, but I mean, my point remains that in the family wealth structuring space, we have been, during the pendency of the Corporate Transparency Act back and forth, we've been helping clients kind of thinking through the structure of foreign non-reporting companies, and the secret is using a non-U.S. jurisdiction and then bifurcating the management regime so that the client can serve, again, kind of back to this idea of tailoring powers, letting the client serve as the investment manager. They've got kind of like an investment trust advisor. They make the decisions, you get a non-discretionary mandate, and then having an independent third-party general manager in a jurisdiction that doesn't require reporting and filing with the Secretary of State. And so that's a lot of the work that we continue to do, even in this, like murky non-enforcement zone for CTA.
Do you have clients to shift, to pivot a little bit? Do you have clients who come to you and they have, aggregated wealth, family wealth, earned in their career, whatever it may be, and they want exposure to Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies? Is there an educational component to what you do, or are most of the people who come to you, they already have it and don't need to be taught?
We're seeing a shift in that, Kyle. I mean, we started around Bitcoin, and I would say that the overwhelming majority of the clients that we see are clients who made their wealth in Bitcoin or in digital assets. But even in the digital asset space, probably 90% of our clients were Bitcoiners. But we are seeing a lot of single family offices for ultra high net worth families and just other ultra high net worth people who have come out of an exit or whatever. And they know that we're a multifamily office. We're in this space. We're now Bitcoin native. We've been in the Bitcoin space since 2017. And so they say, yeah, how do we think about this? How do I get exposure? We've had some conversations with people who bought, $50 million worth of an ETP. They bought, they bought BlackRock or whatever. And they said, now how do I think about getting out of the ETP and into Bitcoin, into a custodial framework? And this idea of custody is, going to maybe tie into a conversation that Moish and I were having a little bit earlier, which is, how do you think about maintaining private key material once you own the underlying asset, whether you started with the underlying asset, now you need the structure for it, or whether you started with ETP exposure, or you're just like Bitcoin curious and now you want to actually acquire the asset. How do you think about ownership? How do you think about custody? How do you think about tax consequences? And those are all decisions that we help people think through.
Very important. And the custodial angle to it is something that's very important to not just us, but to all our clients, and really should be top of mind to everybody out there. How you store your assets. Do you still get people who come to you and say, oh, I made 40 million in Bitcoin. It's all sitting on Coinbase. I mean, after this morning, I can't even say that out loud, but
dude, I had that conversation yesterday.
Yeah.
I had that conversation yesterday with a dude out of San Francisco. He's in his 60s. He's a serial real estate entrepreneur. And now he's got, I don't think it's 40 million. I think he's got, I think he said around 10, sitting at about 10 million sitting at Coinbase. It's like, that's not great.
Danger Will Robinson.
Danger Will Robinson. And here's the one I get more often than that, Kyle. It's like, again, these are my clients. It's like, yeah, I mined Bitcoin back in 2010 on a laptop when I was in college. Mined about 5,000. Okay, that's a little over $500 million by my count. And so, I mean, I'm not great at math, but I can do that. And this is my prototypical client. And they said, I just feel good about having my key material. I said, that's great. What happens next? It's like, I'm an estate planning attorney. I'm always going to be thinking about, I've always got to be thinking second order effect, third order effect. What happens when you die? What happens when you have a stroke? What happens when you have a massive federally taxable estate? What happens in a state where you have state level estate tax?
Right.
What happens when you want to liquidate this stuff? Because if you've got, a lot of the clients I see are 90+% of their total wealth is in Bitcoin or in crypto, low basis Bitcoin, low basis crypto, whatever. And so it's like, okay, well, you ever want to buy something? I mean, you want to buy a house, you want to start a business, you want to capitalize something else. How are you going to do that? How do you think about that? And this whole idea of not your keys, not your coins, all that stuff that we've heard for years and years and years. It's like, that's great when Bitcoin is a few $100, maybe a few $1,000, and the grand total of what's in your bank, if you're going to be your own bank, if the total of what's in the bank is $50,000, fine, knock yourself out. End of the day, probably not going to be that material to your family's wealth. But now, in the world of Bitcoin being worth tens of thousands and now six figures, it's like, you got to grow up. I mean, you got to grow up. This is now a real asset. You got to treat it like a real asset. This is not just Bitcoin. This is not just like internet funny money anymore. This is like massive generational wealth that you have built. You have to create generational architecture around that wealth. If you want to get the kinds of outcomes that you want, if you want to mitigate your tax, if you want to pass this on intelligently to the next generation, if you want to provide for your spouse or partner, if you want to run wealth into charities, you got to grow up and treat this right.
Yeah. So I guess, how do you, this is what you were talking about before, is you've got these people, us, I think on this call included, who feel very strongly that self-custody and the purpose of Bitcoin is reinforced by that. And there is this feeling that you need to have, not your keys, not your coin, you need to own the Bitcoin outright. But then that intersects with what you're exactly talking about, is once you get to a certain level of wealth, and especially if you ask an attorney, what's the proper legal way to prepare for and plan for some of these intergenerational questions, tax questions, like, growing up and putting on the suit. It does seem to be, yes, there's a spectrum where you go from, I fully self-custody and that's all I'm doing, to everything's behind a trust and there's a trust protector and et cetera. And maybe but like, how do you even have that conversation? At what point in the trajectory of someone having some of that wealth or that wealth growing does it even make sense to start asking those questions? Like, where does this conversation start? How did it start? Perhaps when you were, maybe like that early stage, and how has that conversation matured? As we know, like we're now having much more sophisticated conversations about asset protection, wealth planning involving crypto that I don't think anyone at least was having publicly, 3 or 4 years ago. But it seems like that's a lot of where the conversation is now, and certainly is going to become much more mainstream as Bitcoin continues to, we think, increase in value. Even if it doesn't, it's already at six figures. It's a pretty big deal, where it wasn't when it was $3,000.
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, the conversation, the conversation is very gradual, very iterative, and it argues in favor of what we've created at Bespoke, which is a family office, so we can kind of walk along that journey with clients. Because when we were just in the law practice space, even though we wanted to be a relational estate planning law practice, there is still a transactional nature to it. And so now we can be more objective, I think, and more agnostic to what a client ultimately does with their Bitcoin, because we end up with relationships that are based off of the total value of the wealth that we're supporting strategically. And so you bring into us whatever you want us to be thinking about for you. And then we can, whether we're supporting the custody through qualified custodial relationships, or whether we're just helping you think through your multi-sigs or helping you think through your self-custody solutions, we slow down the conversation, and we get philosophical about this stuff. And I think we have some credibility to say, look, we've only been in the Bitcoin space since 2017, but in the, that's kind of a long time now. I mean, it's,
So we're not just like the newcomers here. So we get it. We've not been chasing the crypto stuff. We've not been doing all the DeFi stuff. It's like we're kind of Bitcoiners. We do support people with crypto beyond Bitcoin, and that's fine. But I mean, ideologically, we're probably Bitcoiners. I say, look, we get it. But if you rewind the clock to when you were mining Bitcoin or when you were buying Bitcoin out of a sense of sovereignty and ideological kind of values and this kind of stuff, what was the price of Bitcoin back then? And what was the percentage of your total family wealth that was comprised of that Bitcoin? Odds are the value of your Bitcoin has grown at a pace that is far faster than anything else you've ever had.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's like, so your level of sophisticated thinking around this asset also has to keep up. And it hasn't. It's like if you're still sitting on the not your keys, not your coins mantra as the end all, then you got to evolve your thinking. We're not saying you have to give up all of your control. It's like, because it's like you don't just have like one Bitcoin. You have
well, even if you do, they're divisible.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, so I said, look, I said, look, I do the same thing for myself in a size appropriate way. The vast majority of my Bitcoin is in qualified custody, owned by a limited liability company, which is owned by an offshore trust. That's outside of my estate from an estate tax perspective. It's beyond the reach of my creditors. That's a high friction type of environment. And so when I want access to that, there's a lot of friction between me and those assets.
Right.
But with that friction comes protection, comes tax efficiency. It creates this multi-generational vehicle through which I can provide for my family, maybe for generations, depending on what happens. And so it's like, okay, well, that's not all of my Bitcoin. Then I have what I would consider more of a moderate friction type of environment where I've got a vault set up at a qualified custodian that's just in the name of my revocable living trust, and it's got a few Bitcoins in there. It's like I can access that anytime I want to, but if I step off the curb and get hit by a bus, or here in the mountains more likely like run over by a moose, then okay, there's at least a framework for that part. But then I've got like beer money Bitcoin. If I go to a pub and somebody says, and they're Bitcoin curious or whatever, I can say, hey, download your
there you go
Moon wallet or your X's wallet or whatever you want to. And next round's on me.
Yep.
And so I'll send them some sats. It's like, fine. Now from a tax accounting perspective, it's a pain in the butt, but it allows me to kind of share the orange pill journey in a very low friction or no friction type of environment. But the way I've sized that is the no friction Bitcoin. That's the Bitcoin that if I get stomped to death by a moose, okay, that's not great for a lot of reasons, but the amount of Bitcoin that gets lost, kind of immaterial. The stuff that's in the moderate friction, it's still includable in my estate because it's in my revocable trust. It's in a qualified custodian with layers of multi-sig built in. But when something ultimately happens to me, my spouse, my kids, my trustees, they can access that no problem. Includable in my estate, within the reach of my creditors. If I were to get sued for whatever reason, my wife divorces me or something else, fine. The high friction environment, that's for the most important part of my wealth. And so that's where my equity in Bespoke Group sits. And that's where the vast majority of my Bitcoin sits. So it's, I tell clients, I say, look, this is the journey I've been on. And I don't have hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. I can't afford to be my own client. But I size my solutions in ways that are appropriate for me. You've got a whole lot more to deal with. And so let's start thinking about that journey for you. And as I mentioned, because we're not a transactional type of shop, if it takes you 5 years to figure this out, that's fine. I mean, I don't really care. And I don't care who you hire to do your estate planning work, we can help you strategize. We can help map it for you. We can track the values. We can make recommendations. When you want to rotate out of Bitcoin into something else, we can help you think about how you rotate out. When you want to diversify globally across your investments, you want to get access to markets that are ordinarily not available to U.S. depositors. Mm-hmm. When you want access to Swiss banking as a U.S. client, we're your guys. But whenever you want to have your dynasty trust, your sale transactions, your grats, your slats, your alphabet soup. We can help you think through that. We can explain it to you. We're not on the clock. So it's like, we're getting paid either way. So we can just help you understand that. And then when you find an estate planning attorney, or if you want us to help you find one, we'll help you find that. We'll project manage it for you. We'll provide some perspectives if the attorney's open to our perspectives on that deal. And then once it's done, we'll just bring that in and kind of shepherd it for you as things go. And so that's just the way we've been able to establish our relationships.
It's fantastic. I'm curious. You said something about getting stepped on by the moose, but I've been hearing a lot in the news lately about the wrench attacks. In fact, there's a list of all the different.
Yep,
totally.
And so I'm curious how, if any component of this is about personal security and safety, and I think it's just important. I'm curious, like, what besides just not disclosing your worth and how much Bitcoin you have, which I think people generally shouldn't do. Yeah. Is there more proactive things people can do to be mindful of those kinds of attacks, and what curious what you think about on that issue?
Yeah, I mean the attack is something that's definitely on our minds a lot, and as much for us as it is for our clients, frankly, because mostly because we're getting
we also accept Bitcoin, and
so
our firm has it on our balance sheet, and et cetera.
Yeah, we're unapologetic about the fact that we're in this space, and I do a lot of presentations and stuff like that. So I'm a bit of a known quantity, which does concern me personally. From a client perspective, you're right. I mean, a lot of it is OPSEC. Don't tell people you got Bitcoin. Don't be that. Yeah, sorry, guys. Don't be that douchebag driving around with a Bitcoin license plate. It's like, sorry. I mean, sorry if that's a bit too risque, but it's like, don't be that guy.
Conversation we just had the other day.
Yeah, it's like don't be the guy with the with the wrapped Tesla that's like bright orange and it says like to the moon or whatever. It's like,
got the Bitcoin sunglasses right here. Like,
yeah, I've got all kinds of Bitcoin tchotchkes on the desk
my
behind
Bitcoin
me.
yo-yo. Imagine just roll.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, okay, if you're going to be in the space, and that's fine. But be smart about it. Yeah. And back to this idea of protecting stacks, it's like you could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars or tens of millions of dollars, whatever the wealth is, and size your sovereignty appropriately. It's like, by which I mean sovereignty in the Bitcoiner's sense, this self-sovereign key custody thing. It's like, you feel free to maintain a stack. Let that be the stack that you're willing to lose, and then structure for the rest of it. So then, if you do happen to get doxxed, you do happen to get subject to a $5 wrench attack, or somebody wants your thumbs more than you do, or whatever it is, then you can give up some Bitcoin. It could even be a meaningful amount to whoever wants to give you a hard time, but it's not the entire thing. In fact, maybe it's only like 5% of what you've got. But I want to touch on this sovereignty argument too, because this is, I'm a sovereignty maximalist, but I have kind of a nuanced way of thinking about it, which again, probably occupational hazard. We're all a bunch of lawyers on here. It's like, it is and it's not. But I think a lot of times in the Bitcoin space, the conversation around sovereignty is overwrought or is just seen as a binary type of thing. I think of sovereignty as taking control of the totality of your situation. And it's not just like having sovereign key material. It is to a point, but it's also seizing the greatest opportunity that the law and regulations will allow to make sure that you structure your family wealth according to your rules, which should mean privacy, which you don't get once you die. You got probate, you got guardianship or conservatorship if you get hit by a bus or the moose doesn't finish its job. And, it's subject to the claims of your creditors unless you want to be the guy who's going to commit fraud and then go to jail for that ultimately. Then you got a structure for this type of stuff. And so then how do you structure that exercise in structuring intelligently, the exercise in opportunistically selecting the right strategies and the right jurisdictions? That is sovereignty. That is controlling the family situation. Sovereignty back when Bitcoin was $10, $100, $1,000, $10,000. That's key sovereignty. That's great. You can still have key sovereignty over a small portion of your wealth, but then you have to think more expansively about what sovereignty means. And then back to our prior
part of this conversation. Grow up. I have been so on the nose with potential clients and with presentations to say there are only two people who don't need to do any kind of structured planning, and that's Peter Pan or Deadpool. It's like if you were never going to grow up,
right?
Or if you literally cannot die, then fine, do whatever you want to do.
Great.
But if you're not Peter Pan and if you're not Deadpool, you better do something more intelligently about your wealth. Grow up.
How do you think about leverage? I hear a lot about,
oh man,
like you got strategy, formerly MicroStrategy, talking about, Bitcoin treasury and leverage. Now people are talking about private kind of treasury companies. More companies are holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet. More people are now have access to tools, whether it's centralized exchanges or increasingly more sophisticated, like quasi-custodial arrangements that also allow for lending and kind of leverage type. So like, how does that fit into, obviously there's tons of benefits where if you have a ton of Bitcoin and you have zero basis and you don't want a huge taxable event, as you start to utilize some of that, like it makes sense that you would take a loan and use that to, or I think there's probably use for that. But then again, is that just part of that spectrum? Is there more or less sophisticated ways to think about that? How does it fit in?
The way I think about that, Moish, is I think they're two different things. What MicroStrategy and these companies that are doing, I can't argue with what they're doing. They're taking an asset that is, like company debt or even company equity that they largely can control the value of, and then buying a pristine asset with that. They're issuing debt and they're buying Bitcoin. I think that's pretty freaking brilliant. I think that's great. When you're talking about individuals, I think the conversation shifts. And if you've been in the crypto world for more than a hot second, you've seen all the carnage of like Three Arrows Capital and Celsius and BlockFi and FTX and all of its, there's so much radioactive fallout that arose from this pursuit of alpha, this excess return above just Bitcoin's ordinary perforence. And
which on its own is the best performing financial asset.
Yeah,
certainly in our lifetimes, maybe ever.
There is no other one. That's it. Michael Saylor is right about that. It's like there is no second best. It's like it's it. But I also understand that I understand the allure of people who are in the digital asset space, and they say, "Hey, all these proof of stake tokens can generate a staking return for me. I can do what I want to do in DeFi. I can roll this through protocols and lend and borrow and all this kind of stuff." And we don't and can't and wouldn't support that anyway because we're SEC registered. So we're under the custody rule. We can't do any of that stuff anyway. We're also risk managers, and we think that is really in the thin branches of risk. So we don't. If clients want to do that, it's their money. They do whatever they want to with it. But the stuff that we manage for them, we don't even engage in that at all. And our philosophy about this idea of seeking additional alpha on top of the world's best performing asset is, it's like, okay, let's think about the mechanisms that are involved in doing that. The borrow is not great against Bitcoin. If you're going to use a qualified lender for this, you're not getting the kind of borrow rates that you would get if you're borrowing against real estate or borrowing against gold or some other type of long-term store of value asset. It doesn't make sense for those of us who understand Bitcoin, but Bitcoin's vol just kind of, the lending market is not deep enough yet to give interesting interest rates.
You would expect that over time that
totally.
Market will become more mature and those spreads will narrow and
yeah, absolutely. And the other side of this is so much of what we see passing for Bitcoin alpha is either running option strategies on the Bitcoin.
Yep.
And I've seen that go far more wrong than right. I've seen people become forced sellers.
Yeah.
And they become forced sellers at the wrong time on a zero basis or low basis asset. So now you've lost the underlying asset and you just triggered a massive capital gains tax liability. What are you going to do to satisfy that? You're going to sell more Bitcoin. That's going to create this spiraling effect of capital gains tax liability. Terrible outcome. Okay. So then what happens if I want alpha through a fund? Okay. So let's think about this. we have Bitcoin, the native underlying asset. We have Bitcoin sitting hopefully in some type of qualified custody if it's economically material to your family. But even if you have key material sovereignty over that, you own the asset. And then you pledge that into a fund, or you exchange that into a fund. Now you don't own the underlying. You own a minority interest in the limited partnership agreement. You're on somebody else's ledger as an unsecured creditor if they fail. You have no visibility as to how the partnership is custodying its underlying assets. You have no price discovery because you're lucky to get a quarterly report that has any kind of meaningful value, and you have no liquidity. When you want to sell, you can't sell. When you want to redeem, you're probably subject to at least a 12-month lockup initially, and then you might have like quarterly redemptions. It's like, guys, understand what you are giving up in pursuit of a few additional basis points, or even consequential potential upside. Look at the risk of the downside, and then the way we think about alpha is much more comprehensive than that. We think about seeking alpha in the context of tax mitigation, asset protection, liability insulation, long-term family wealth governance, and then preserving flexibility and optionality. You don't get that in most of the strategies through which you're seeking alpha. And then if you're playing in the DeFi liquidity pools, you've got all kinds of protocol risk. You're trying to take a non-stakeable asset and turn it into some type of version of a staking asset. It's like, if it works for you, great, but don't come crying to us when these things unwind. And all you have to do is have a modicum of understanding about the recent history of crypto to realize that seems to work. That seems to fail more often than not.
I think that's really powerful. And I think it gets back to the Peter Pan analogy of once you've worked through all this low hanging fruit of tax optimization and custody optimization, all these things, like, okay, maybe then we could talk about it when you've kind of run through all those roadblocks. But there really is there's so much of the basics that people forget to even start with. Yeah. And they just jump to, okay, let's do all of that, right?
Well, it's because Bitcoin starts as mad money for these guys. It's like,
yeah.
It's
exactly right.
It was immaterial. It was immaterial for them. It's like, even if it was somewhat material, like my very first client kind of somewhat famously spent their last $10,000 on Bitcoin back when that would buy you a lot of Bitcoin. And so it's like, he was kind of YOLO. Okay, fine. Just YOLO. That's great. Continue to YOLO with $10,000. And if you want to be crazy, adjust that for inflation. Okay, so lose your mind.
Right.
Oh,
or size it proportionally to what your risk is. Maybe it should be 5% mad money. Go crazy, maybe it's 10% of your mad money or whatever, but just understand, go crazy with the amount that doesn't matter. And if it moons on you, that's so great. Congratulations, you just won at the casino. But if it goes to zero, don't create this spiraling unwind that then decimates your entire stack. Yep. Don't get cute playing to play short and running all these perpetual options. It's like, cap your losses.
Yeah,
I'm not a big gambler. I've been to Vegas a couple of times, but my rule has always been gamble with what you're willing to lose. And then once you've recovered that, only play with house money. And then just keep playing with house money. And if you want to keep scraping, that's great. But don't lose the kitty.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's a mistake a lot of people make. I've been guilty of it when I was a younger man. You see people all the time. It's don't chase losses, don't euphoria trade, and above all else, pigs get slaughtered. You gotta stick to those three, and you'll be okay.
100%, dude, man. Absolutely.
You mentioned before, if I could pivot a little bit, you were talking before about using Bitcoin as tender to pay for things. And before I ask the question, Moish, what's the name of that bar in the city that takes Pub Key?
Nice.
Have you been there, Matt?
No, I haven't. No.
It's a really. I was just describing it to someone. It's like the Cheers of Bitcoin.
Sweet. Where is it?
You walk in, everyone in there's a Bitcoin. There's always an event going on. It's like people that like, or that company is like doing something. It's awesome. Go check it out. I was going to an event in the neighborhood couple weeks ago. I was like, oh, I have half an hour to kill. Let me walk in. I walked in. I like knew two people. I knew the company that was holding an event. I like met someone new that was like super interesting. It's like, definitely check it out when you're next.
Yeah, I'm actually coming to the city sometime late July, I think. So I'll have to come check it out. I'll get some more information from you guys. Yeah.
Well, we'll definitely meet up there. But do you envision a world where that becomes the norm? You've seen countries and certain areas in Africa and Asia, El Salvador, somewhat notably, where they've tried to let people use crypto, Bitcoin, or whatever it may be to pay for things. Do you see a world in which that kind of takes over, at least in the United States?
I go back and forth on that, Kyle. I think yes, at some point. I think Bitcoin has been on a really interesting journey, which is it follows the course of all kinds of stores of money that we've talked about. I mean, it has multiple qualities. It could be a medium of exchange. It could be a unit of account. It could be a store of value. The answer is probably to some degree, it's all at the same time. And the U.S. dollar has historically been that way, although its value as a store of its use as a store of value is diminishing somewhat rapidly, especially compared to stronger currencies like the like the franc and Singapore dollar and others like that. But I am optimistic that within the next, I don't know, I always hate to put a date on something, but I'd say within the next decade, I hope we see some reasonable legislation and regulation around the use of digital assets more broadly and beyond just stable coins. I mean, stable coins are great for that kind of stuff. But yeah, I'd love to see a world where there is a meaningful de minimis value exception for the use of Bitcoin or Ether or Solana or anything like that, that's readily tradable. I mean, we've all read the white paper. I mean, Bitcoin was floated not as a peer-to-peer store of value system. It was marketed as a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. That's what it was designed for, to create a medium of exchange between parties who have no reason to trust each other and never even meet. And that was its purpose. But by the nature of its algorithm, it just is designed to go up in value against inflationary assets. So yes, I hope to see meaningful de minimis value exceptions either on a per transaction basis or on a per quarter or per year basis to say look, you can spend up to $10,000 of your Bitcoin each year and it's not going to be a taxable event. No, once you go above that, then maybe it's still subject to the capital gains tax rules. I mean, because I think that's kind of fine. But this whole idea of a de minimis of $50 or $600 or whatever, it's that's, I mean, I could not buy us a round of beers in New York City for $50. I mean, it's
yeah.
I mean, seriously. So give a reasonable de minimis value exception, below which basis tracking doesn't matter. And then once we're doing tens of thousands of dollars worth of transactions or much, much more, maybe that's a different conversation. I think that it's going to take a couple of things. I think one, it's going to take a turnover in the gerontocracy that governs most states and certainly Washington. I think it's going to take a turn. I think it's going to take a generational secular shift around regulation and legislation. I think we will ultimately get there. The question to my mind is timeline, and I think it's trying to pin a time on something is a fool's errand.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But we'll see. Well, you heard it here first. You heard it here first. 10 years from now, it's going to happen.
That's right.
We'll
be doing it anyway.
In terms of regulation, is there anything else from your perspective that you think should be spoken more about in terms of a wish list for regulation impacting crypto? I know, especially from the RIA and legal adjacent space, there's probably not a lot, as far as I know, spoken about in that context. I mean, one of the things that I was especially I want 401k to have the Bitcoin fund, and those are things that are kind of in this kind of gray off limit zone right now. Is there anything else on that list that you would want to see that the regulators or that industry talks about in terms of regulation that should happen?
Yeah, I think there are a couple that come to mind. It's a great question. I would like to see the ability to have Bitcoin or crypto natively in a tax deferred account without having to go the route of
like self-directed.
Yeah, self-directed with an LLC that then
Yeah,
takes
I
cash
mean,
and puts it into. Yeah.
I've had that since 2018, and it's fine. It's a hassle, but it's fine. I'd like to see that more natural in this, and more readily available for people. And the other one that really is a hot button issue, which you kind of alluded to in the lending space, I want to see very clear legislation come out of Congress with very clear rulemaking by Treasury that doesn't just open the doors to banking for people who operate with crypto, but I'd like to see strong penalties against banks that debank Bitcoiners and people in crypto. It's like
Interesting.
I would love
Yeah.
to see that flip because this is the whole choke point 2.0 type of thing.
Yep.
We saw it. I try to be about as agnostic politically as possible, but we saw this during the Obama administration during choke point 1.0 when regulators went after ammunition, firearms companies, porn companies, other companies like that were perfectly legal but just deemed to be unsavory by the administration at the time. Then we saw during the Biden administration the resurgence of choke point 2.0, primarily focused around gambling, online gaming, and crypto. And in both cases, that seemed like profound overreach, and it was outside the bounds of legislation. They got Obama's administration got their hand slapped on choke point 1.0, and then Biden resurrected it. And I'm not a Trump fan. It's like that's not me, but um, at least the executive order that effectively um, prohibits what in a way this idea of choke point 2.0, that's a step in the right direction. But executive orders are only as resilient as
Yeah.
we know as whoever's sitting in the White House. And so unless and until Congress enacts meaningful legislation and Treasury enacts meaningful regulations in support of the enforcement of that legislation that will financially penalize banks that otherwise debank perfectly legitimate, law-abiding citizens who simply are acting in the crypto space, that would be the biggest regulatory shift I could imagine. And then,
Excellent
and
point.
then, and then, now all the banks jump in and say, "Oh, wait a second, we want a piece of this crypto action." Well, now you're going to get reasonable lending rates, and then we're going to see a lot more velocity, I think, in the on the movement towards what Kyle was asking, which is saying, "Okay, well, what else can we be thinking about from a crypto regulation perspective? Maybe we do start allowing transactions on the blockchain with tokenized assets, with reasonable de minimis exceptions from a reporting perspective, that kind of stuff."
Yeah, the other point that ties to what you were saying before, I think that should fit in with that, and you're seeing it now with the new proposed stablecoin bill, which I think was released earlier this morning, is the creditor protections
Yeah.
and making clear that like if you're doing a stablecoin, you can't be Celsius because those are two different things, right?
Well, one last question. I want to be mindful of your time, Matt, and thank you so much just for all the insight. Moish and I are really excited to have you on. You mentioned you're an avid reader, as am I. And one of the books that I've read, I mean, it was years ago. It's called Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein, but it's something that I think, do you have it right there? No way.
No, I don't. I'm going to write it down.
Yeah, it was. I was going to be amazed. It's a great book about what does value come from? Where do we derive? What do we want? Is it money? Is it things? Is it tangible goods? Is it barter system? All that kind of stuff. And little did I know how important that would be as I began my crypto journey. So for our viewers and listeners out there who are not necessarily keen to these things, what would be the starting point for them? What should they read first?
Oh, geez.
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would have them start with Epictetus, and then proceed on to Letters from a Stoic by Seneca,
Okay.
and then Marcus Aurelius, and spend some time with that, and starting to really zoom out. Take assets out of the equation for a second, and just zoom out. What matters? Read the Tao Te Ching.
Yeah.
It's like just zoom out and realize that this journey that we're on is a lifespan. It is a lifespan. It's not a moment in time. And a lot of what I see in the crypto space is just like chase the money, number go up, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what got a lot of people into Bitcoin as it rallied. And I think people are still aping into Bitcoin that way. But then the longer you're in this space, at least for my journey and the journey that I've seen through some clients, is when you overlay a deeper philosophical perspective, it's like you say, wait a second, everything slows down, and you're less concerned about the spot price at any given time. I still check the price multiple times a day. I mean, I'm sorry, it's an occupational
Old
hazard.
habits die hard.
Old habits die hard. It's like, is it above 3,000 today? It's like, oh yeah. And so, because it's like I've been around that long, but it's like
we're best friends.
Yeah. So I would start with that, and then I would also, I mean, I'm a big fan of the sovereign individual, and whether it is good reading or not, some of us argue about this internally within Bespoke Group. I mean, my head of geopolitical macro analysis and my CIO hate this book. I love this book, and it is The Fourth Turning, and it's
sure.
like, and this idea, whether it's they can, my guys kind of hang up on the fact that William Howe and Neil Strauss they got so many facts wrong. It's like, okay, zoom out, do the philosophical reading. What is fundamentally wrong about this idea that generations operating together create a cocktail that generates a tone of an age? And it's like, no, history doesn't repeat, but maybe sometimes it has an echo. Maybe sometimes it has a rhyme. And again, this idea that if we realize that our lives are probably 70, 80, maybe 90 years or longer as we progress, the returns that we chase quarter to quarter, kind of immaterial. And so zoom out. And the journey that I would have people explore is a journey of meaning. What is it about? If you're building this great wealth, why? What's it for? What's it for? It's like, there's probably not a wrong answer to the question, but you have to at least sit with a question. Are you driven by it, and that's all you know how to do? Great. Okay, why is that? And then, are you going to leave anything behind? The answer is probably yeah. Okay, then to whom are you going to leave that? What do you want them to know about you, and what drove you to build this wealth? And then what do you want them to think about as they learn how to become stewards of this wealth that is found money to them? If you're going to create a windfall, which is what most of my clients have done, so if you're going to create a windfall, what goes into that? Part of that is, yes, economically enriching the lives of the people that you care about, your children, grandchildren, whatever. But is it possible that part of the inheritance that you'll also leave behind is a deeper sense of meaning, a deeper sense of their humanity, a thrive, this desire to really flourish as a well-rounded human? And maybe part of the inheritance is a better world for your children and your grandchildren to grow up in. And then that might manifest in some impact-oriented investing. That certainly should manifest in some intelligent philanthropy and really active thinking about philanthropy, not just a testamentary clat to wipe out your estate tax when you die. That's fine. But what about now? It's like, what, I'm working on a charitable remainder trust model for some clients right now. They happen to live in the East Coast in a high income tax jurisdiction, zero basis Bitcoin. And so that's the vast majority of their wealth. They're deeply, deeply, authentically philanthropic, but they've been just donating Bitcoin to a donor advised fund that we've helped manage for them. And as you guys know, then when you donate property to a donor advised fund, you can only deduct up to 30% of your AGI against that property deduction. But if you donate cash, then you can deduct up to 60% of your AGI. So part of what we're recommending to them, and part of what I'm going to be modeling the rest of this day and tomorrow, is various forms of charitable remainder trusts, annuity trusts, unit trusts, to then make a contribution of Bitcoin to this charitable remainder trust. They've got cash needs anyway. They've got capital calls. They've got other investments they want to make. Okay, so then sell the Bitcoin through the charitable remainder trust. You got a deduction when you funded the CRT, and then you sell the Bitcoin inside the CRT. You're going to take back an income stream, either an annuity or a fixed percentage of the underlying value. Yeah, that's going to be subject to income tax to you. That's fine. But you don't have a massive income tax recognition event in 1 year. You got a deduction
That's again, it's a 30% deduction. But now guess what you can do with the cash flow? You can take that cash flow and now you can augment your charitable giving with cash. That's deductible at 60%, up to 60% of your AGI.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So you can be really kind of start thinking more deeply about what your wealth means. And this gets to a certain degree, this is back to the sovereignty conversation and the friction conversation. These are high friction types of strategies. You can't just do this by, you have to go through a lot of steps to make this stuff happen. But when you do, the juice that you get from a tax perspective, from an asset protection perspective, from a family governance and family wealth transfer perspective, that is massive, massive. And these were people who, when we met them, had engaged in some of the alpha chasing strategies and ended up becoming forced sellers. They were borrowing fiat against their Bitcoin at like 15% interest rates.
Yeah.
When they'd get called for collateral, they'd have to top up, or then they'd be forced sellers. The forced sale causes a capital gains tax hit. Now they get capital gains tax liability. They sell Bitcoin to pay the capital gains tax liability, and it creates this circular effect. It's like, wait a second, guys, slow it down.
Yeah.
Let's start slowing it down.
I love that idea.
Think more long term. And so, very long-winded answer to your very succinct question, Kyle. But it's like this notion of take in more information.
Yeah.
Slow it down. You don't have to make this decision right now. Slow it down. And you've got many, many bites at the apple if you do this right. You don't have to do this whole thing at once.
That's great stuff, Matt. Really, thank you for just a wonderful, spirited conversation. Sorry I was a couple of minutes late, but Moish and I were really excited to have you on, and you did not not meet our expectations. This was fantastic, and we hope to have you on again soon.
I'd love to be on. I really thank you guys for the opportunity to just chat. I mean, I enjoyed meeting you guys the very first time, and I've been thrilled for this conversation. So thank you for hosting me.
Where else can our audience, if they want to learn more about you and Bespoke, where can they find you?
Yeah, the company's website is just bespokegroup.io. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm still one of the old guys knocking around on LinkedIn, just under Matt McClintock. If you index Matt McClintock against Bespoke Group, you're going to find me. I am intermittently on Twitter. I'm so old, I call it Twitter.
That's what it's called.
We do too.
It's like, I mean, X is a letter. It's just dumb.
It's absurd. Come on.
Yeah.
Look, if HBO, Max can go back to HBO Max, I still am holding out hope that X can go back to Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter for the win, man.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm on Twitter episodically at McClintock. So it's MCCLINTOCK _M. McClintock _M. Not super active there because there's, I think it's kind of a cesspool of bad ideas generally.
With you there.
It's not the place where you slow it down. I'll say that.
It's not.
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
it's like, guys, it's like there's no room for nuance.
Yeah.
There's no room for meaningful conversation. But I'm there every once in a while when people want to kind of dig in a little bit deeper. So I've got a couple of pieces I'll be dropping pretty soon. I also have a Substack, so I'm told. My team has set one up for me, but I don't know. It's like, I guess that's what the cool kids are doing these days. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, fine. But I'll be dropping some content fairly soon. So people can kind of stay tuned to that. We also do a quarterly newsletter through our company.
We'll update our show notes to include the content. So please send us a link. And again, thank you so much for coming on and for the meaningful conversation.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt.
Well, that was our conversation with Matt McClintock from the Bespoke Group. And in watching it again, Moish, I'm just reminded just how great of a speaker he is and how insightful he was. Really special thank you to Matt. His time is very important. And frankly, I can't wait to have him on again in 6 months when the world is upside down again and Bitcoin is doing God knows what.
I thought you were going to say you can't wait to hire him when you have $100 million.
Well, that goes without saying.
But yeah, exactly.
That's good. What'd you think of Matt's, just, what he brings to the table is unique because we approach everything from a legal perspective. But to hear his thoughts is not, I don't think we've really had a guest on with his sort of specific background before.
Yeah, it's very unique to be a asset manager, financial planner for people in this space. And really, I mean, you talk to a lot of financial advisors who don't really deal with crypto. and they're very hesitant, and they say, yeah, you can put 1, 2,
Right.
3, 5% into crypto, but anything more than that's kind of crazy. And to hear Matt's take on that obviously is a breath of fresh air. So, and it's not like he's just saying, hey, YOLO, everyone should be crypto. I think he's taking a very
Sure.
measured, personalized approach, which I think is exactly what
It's the
people need.
kind of maturity and measured approach that the space needs, because you're right. There's still a lot of YOLO out there, even when things are not as as firing as they are in bull markets. Even during bear markets, it's important to have that type of measured approach. It's the perfect word to use to describe him. So, very special thank you to Matt. Thank you again for your time, and hopefully we can see him again. That's it for another episode of Block and Order. Very special thank you to producer Sean. Without him, the show would not be possible. Don't forget to like and subscribe to all our socials. Links are down below in the show notes. Don't forget that Block and Order is intended to be informational and for entertainment purposes only. We do not dispense legal advice here. Please consult your own attorney or advisor if you're going to take the plunge. And any assets that we may discuss on this show is not an indication of an endorsement of any type of those assets, even if we own them. So on behalf of Moish Peltz, I'm Kyle Lawrence. Take care, everybody.
See you next time.